Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artists Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with another episode of the Artists Index. Wow, I think I just totally lost count. This is either episode 113 or 114. We're really getting up there in the three-digit area. And what we don't have enough of are musical artists, people from the acoustic world versus the visual world. And we're going to try to fix that. So today's guest is sitting in two seats. One is as a guest, as an artist, and the other one we have a little announcement to make. So we're going to take it from there. Guest, please introduce yourself and spell your name.
I'm Scott Bishop, S-C-O-T-T, B as in boy, I-S-H-O-P. And I'm a musician, songwriter, and sound sculptor based out of New Bedford. My project is called Scapeghost. That's where I dip my pop songs and weird sounds. And that's why I've been operating under for the last 5 years as a musician.
As they say to painters, so how does that working for you?
It's working pretty well, Ron, honestly. Like this is the busiest I've ever been as a musician. I am in the midst of a project with the New Bedford Whaling National Historical Park, NBWaves, where I went around New Bedford into various businesses and institutions, and I did field recordings, and I brought those into the music. So the sonic DNA of New Bedford is actually in the new music that I wrote for this project. I just put out the first EP, the first 2 songs in February. And that's an ongoing project while I'm also out there, playing shows and booking the monthly AHA mini concert for the Arts and Culture Night here in New Bedford that happens the second Thursday of every month. I've got a music series coming up that's starting in April, Unexpected Music. I have a grant for that, so I'll be booking other artists for that. I have a record to wrap up in the next few months that will hopefully be out next year. It's just, I don't think I've ever had as much fun or been as busy as a musician as I've been since I've lived in New Bedford, and particularly now. I've been here for 3.5 years now. And I feel like I have my hands in a lot of music stuff in a way that I didn't, even when I lived in Boston and was in bands there.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think it's something, the pandemic paradox? Because a lot of people are experiencing the same thing. And the paradox because, well, it's like chicken and the egg sort of thing. What caused it?
Yeah, I think you're right, because a lot of the activity started kicking in for me after things shut down. So for the AHA mini concert, Lee Heald, who runs AHA, knows that I'm a musician. She said, hey, could you put something together for the April AHA? It's going to be all online. I gathered a few musicians, Jake Perrone, Sarah Donner, I think Hooli J. Chan was the other person that we grabbed. We all did a couple of songs each. And after that, Lee was like, well, would you like to book this every month? We have some money to pay for it. We can pay you to host it. And that started connecting me with musicians. I'd done a little bit of that through gigging here in New Bedford, but now I had to actually do outreach, connect with musicians, get outside of my comfort zone, because in a lot of cases, these are musicians that I hadn't met. They're operating in genres maybe I'm not as familiar with. And then a few months down the road, when we moved into pre-recording the concerts and getting people inside of downtown businesses, then I started connecting with businesses like Play Arcade. And of course, Play Arcade has their roof deck series during warm weather months, but they now also just opened up in the National Club space next door. And there are opportunities to do things, on the deck, inside of their space. Other places like the Drawing Room, where I had Molly O'Leary last year. They started doing music in their pocket, their pop-up, the parking area that they had right in front of the Drawing Room. So suddenly I'm connected to musicians, connected to businesses, working with Devin Byrne, opening up the I opened up his 4752 festival, so he knows a lot of bands that I can connect to. It just feels like all these connections started happening, once the pandemic hit, and I kind of had to do outreach and connect with people. And that's expanding through the music series that I'm starting up in April.
And then I had to go make matters worse.
I know. One more thing on my plate, but I
And
didn't have to say yes.
No, you didn't have to say yes. And so we'll just jump ahead to that because there was a perfect segue into it.
Yeah.
And what I did is the Artist Index has received a grant from the Massachusetts Cultural Council through the local Cultural Council, the New Bedford Cultural Council. And that grant was to hire a music host. One of the things I learned a while back was I can't do it all. It's like a banquet set in front of one individual. It's just impossible. We've done this 113, 114 podcasts, and I've only just scratched the surface. And there are areas that I'm curious about as an artist, as an individual, that I can't get to because I don't have enough expertise. So I put out an ad, so to speak, on Facebook, and we had 3 individuals. So we'll name the other 2 as they're coming on board and doing their podcast. And Scott was one of them. And it was like, oh my gosh, it's an embarrassment of riches. What do I do? Which one do I pick? And then the thought hit me, dummy, take them all. Because
Right.
each one of them is astute in a specific genre. And Scott, your genre is primarily
Indian alternative rock. And also I just love generally talking about songwriting regardless of genre.
okay. And then the musical heritage of this area is absolutely phenomenal. Jazz alone, it has a deep jazz roots. And I've heard, and this is what I'm hoping that the 3 of you, whoever's going to be focusing on jazz, and it doesn't mean like if one of the other hosts does it, you can't do it. I mean,
Right.
we're all in this together. I've heard stories that as far back as World War II, this New Bedford was on what they call the Eastern Jazz Circuit. And they had these little hole-in-the-wall clubs, which is pretty much what a lot of jazz artists would play, these small venues in between the larger venues. That's what paid the bills. As the freshly anointed as a freshly anointed host, music arts, performing arts host for the Artist Index in Focus podcast, can you give us a little hint of what you think is out there that you're going to try to bring to our ears?
Well, what's out there is there's a good amount of indie rock and punk rock in the South Coast. I think I mentioned Devin Burns, the 4752 festival. There's a lot of indie bands out there, and he pulled some in from Connecticut and up from Boston, but there's just a huge number of musicians who operate in that sphere. There are tons of songwriters, regardless of genre. I'm good friends with Sarah Donner, who's a tremendous songwriter. The initial group I fell in with here in New Bedford when I started playing out was, people like Cassie Soares and Huli J. Chan, Jake Perrone, Mike Heffernan, all great songwriters that I knew because the starting point was knowing Sarah. You have Lasertooth, so something more like prog rock. There's just tremendous variety and breadth in the area in terms of musicianship, genres, and so I feel like there's a really fertile area with bands like Muter was one that I found totally by accident when I was booking a pre-recorded AHA concert I think a year and a half ago. They recorded inside No Problemo, which is another great spot to find. When they occasionally have those gigs, that's a great spot to find people who are doing punk rock, indie rock, stuff that's a little bit left of center of your typical rock band.
That's an area that I don't even know exists. I mean, obviously because of age, and there's only so much that you can get out there to experience. I am aware, for example, I keep pounding on this of the jazz heritage here, and then there's not the detour, but the branch of Cape Verdean influence on on jazz. So much so that I've heard, and I hope someone can prove it, verify it, not prove it, but verify it, that it's because of Cape Verdean jazz musicians from this city. They created what is the current jazz standard with their incredible talent. My mother, which is one of the reasons why I started this whole podcast series, was a fado singer. She also sang standards in the clubs. She sang traditional Portuguese fado, and whenever she could get a gig doing standards, I mean, she played, all of the classics of that time, Satisfaction, Doggy in a Window, all of those popular tunes. And that was a whole nother group of people, birds of a feather flock together, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the other ethnic music styles, types, genres. The Cape Verdean Morna, which is very similar to fado. And then we've got rock that goes all the way back to when I was a kid, with the pre-garage bands, and then through the garage bands, and then through the whole Woodstock generation thing, and it just goes on and on. And the city, the South Coast has contributed some headliners to the national and international stages. I'm just curious as to what you've got lined up, if you can, reveal any of that.
I can't reveal any of that now. I have ideas and I need to do some outreach, but the wealth of songwriters and musicians, and also musical entrepreneurs, like Purchase Street Records is run by a guy who's also a great drummer, Roger Chouinard, who also has his own history in rock music because he's the nephew of Bobby Chouinard, who was Billy Squire's drummer. So, you have people who are connected to music that goes beyond the South Coast, music that's influenced a lot of people. So when I look at the list of people I could talk to, it's indie rock, but it's also looking at people who are, say, blues and branching out into songwriting, or just looking at songwriters in general, because the craft is so fascinating, and songs are such magical things that we take them for granted. They're just in the air, but they have to come from somewhere, and the infinite ways that people find to write songs is just endlessly fascinating to me.
Quinn Sullivan, who was a phenomenal, or phenom, as they like to say, right?
Yeah.
With Buddy Guy and what was the other gentleman's name?
I know who you're thinking
of.
of.
Yeah. Oh my God, one of the two brothers, Stevie Ray.
Well, the Vaughns. Yeah,
Yes,
Jimmy Vaughn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's Beaver Brown. There's Boston. We're connected to Boston, the group, the supergroup. Tavares, another supergroup. Going back to the 50s, I heard the Flamengos, the Tune Weavers. The Tune Weavers, I think their big hit was Happy Birthday Baby. This is really important stuff. This is goes beyond the, hey, drop a couple of cool things while you're sitting at a bar talking to somebody, and each one is sharing what they've got in their head, the little bits and pieces that they know. This is really important that we get it down. And
there's
that's
real history here.
Yeah, that's what the goal is. I mean, somebody, when we first started this, and I was still teaching marketing, is, you have to have that elevator speech. It's like, so what is this all about? And I was like, well, at first I was going to say we create headstones, and then I know people weren't going to take that correctly. It was going to take too much to explain. So I said, well, we're building pyramids. And they look at me, just as oddly, and say, building pyramids? Says, yeah, pyramids weren't built to preserve the body. They were built to preserve the memory. And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to preserve all these memories, because I keep going back to my mother as an example. I'm one of the few, if any, people left around that remembered her singing. When I'm gone, she will die again, as they say. She's still alive, thank God. But there's the point.
That really resonates with me. I just want to,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that really resonates with me because my oldest brother, Ed, passed away in late 2018. And he was my musical mentor. He was 14 years older than me. Wow. And so my love of music and a lot of the stuff that has really stuck with me in terms of the music I love that's had an impact on me as just a human being, regardless of like music and songwriting, has just been really profound. So, here I am in this, my basement studio space. I can look at the turntable he left behind, and the couple of hundred albums I pulled from the thousands that came back from North Carolina with me and the rest of my family, and just look at it like, this is his legacy as someone who loved music in all its forms. This was a guy who was very rock oriented, but also someone who had a very keen sense of that same history you're talking about. And to the degree of like a lot of the stuff that he had in his collection was stuff that was not so much, I think, that he liked, but it was stuff that he knew our mom and dad would like. And that sense of that through line, that stuff was there when he was a kid and it had value. And here it is in, my hands here in New Bedford. It's a wild thing. And at the same time, like part of what he left behind were also the things that he gifted me, like early REM, Love's Forever Changes, one of my favorite albums, In the Court of the Crimson King, like all this stuff that I take for granted. And that's still, stuff I listen to today, still has an impact on me today. And just realize like, we're carrying that legacy forward in whatever form, however oblique. Like, people may not know when they hear stuff that I do, or when I'm having conversations with people about music, that his influence is there, or that who he even is, but it is there. Like when I have conversations with musicians, he used to interview musicians. So, I probably in the back of my mind, I'll be thinking, well, what would Ed have asked? And that's a way of carrying, his spirit forward, but also it's just his influence is embedded in me now.
Yeah, and that brings me to the next thing. I was speaking with Don Wilkinson the other day, and he's we came up with this when I was explaining to him some of the philosophy, some of the groundwork for the artist index. It was a family tree of sorts, but an artist's family tree, visual performing and literary artists. And at one time we had culinary arts in there, and I think we might bring it back at some point because that's a whole other story that has a lot of deep roots here. But this tree is for, and I was thinking I'm going to try to find that post that he had. For example, his instructor at the Swain School, David Loeffler Smith, was a student of Hans Hofmann.
Oh, wow.
So what he did is he put down who Hans Hofmann's instructor was and who's his instructor's instructor was. And this is, what happens. And then we have these influences. They're like cousins, and several times removed. My instructor, one of my instructors, Ed Tornieri, was also a Hans Hofmann student. And this comes down through, there's an artistic DNA that just is there. And like you said, people may not know how you're being influenced. You may not even know that you're being influenced at that time consciously, but it's important. It is legacy. I guess that's the word I've been trying to snap out of the air there, is legacy.
But I love the family tree concept too, because it's the place where, all these mentors and influences kind of commingle. And I love like that distinction of like, the instructors are kind of, they're, how do you put it? It's like they're the influence cousins, but the instructors are main through line. It's just interesting to think about, like mentors and influences in a relationship to that family tree, because I can see branches that come directly off of things that like mentors like my brother gave me. And then I can see branches that kind of shot off from exploring something related to that, and other branches that I found on my own. And they're all together as one of that huge, big tree of influence. And likewise, I mean, there's that whole family tree we could find, in South Coast music or South Coast art, where you look at like, where the foundational people going back a ways, and where did they branch off?
Oh yeah, you just speak also Paul Clayton talk about traditions of folk art, folk music rather. Paul Clayton, bang, right there. There's another guy. You can't wander the world without being influenced or without influencing someone. And you really don't know what that impact is. Generally, sometimes you do find out it's at the end of your life. Unfortunately, sometimes it's revealed after you've passed on. But I think that, you know, I'm a painter. I'm devoting everything I've got right now to painting. The index is something that I'm trying to expand to make opportunities for other people like you and the two other gentlemen who are going to be hosting their own music divisions. Let's call it that way. And because of the three of you responding to that ad, I realized, okay, we're working in collaboration with the New Bedford Whaling Museum with their Common Ground project that's collecting this kind of information. It's all being digitally archived. Everything's going to be transcripted. I'm hoping at some point in time that all the transcripts are now going to be edited into some sort of a ebook or a softcover book of some sort, whether it's going to be an annual, a biannual, something that you can physically touch and get instead of something that just resides on the internet. And I'd love to get other artists, other people to host their own segments. Well, we're going to have a theater arts, former theater director who's going to take us and show us the South Coast theater heritage. It's kind of daunting, and you can't do it by yourself.
I mean, I would say one of the great things about having a team of people handling music is it doesn't fall on one person. Like if you'd come to me, and this might be true with the other two guys too, you know, if you came to any of us going, hey, do you want to do 21 podcasts? Be like, oh, whoa, how much time do I have to do that? Whereas, you know, the bite-sized piece each of us gets means that not only do we have time to do it, but do it as well as possible, because it's the type of thing that would be just absolutely daunting to take on by yourself. So,
yeah,
you know,
tell me about it.
that. Yeah, no, because you've been doing it. You've been,
yeah.
I mean, you like you said, you've hosted over 100.
Yeah,
that's a huge commitment. You know, the time commitment, just talking with people, but also, you know, the research and the relationships you put into doing that stuff are huge. So, you know, when you can spread a little bit of that effort out and get, you know, a good result, that's good stuff.
Well, the other day I was thinking about, okay, I want to, you know, and then, you know, so you're constantly writing grants, you know how that feels like. But there's also too an opportunity for people who write grants that I've got a public forum for them, because, you know, one of the questions is always, how is the public going to benefit from the project that you're creating? And the other one, and it's been, you know, Carl Simmons has been nibbling away in the back of my head about this, but photography alone in this area is just phenomenal. You know, Len Cabral.
We have phenomenal photographers.
You know, my cousin, Norman Fortier, Dana Smith, who's going to be coming on the show in a couple of episodes. And I'm just blanking out now, but there are so many of them. It's just Anthony Barboza.
Santoro. Yeah.
Yes, Dan Santoro.
Yep.
Just in photography. And we're not just talking about guys, you know, or people, guys, I mean, non-generic, non-gender.
As an umbrella term.
As an umbrella term, you know, people who are photographers who like to do photography. I'm talking about people who have made an impact, who have, John Robson, how could I forget him? I always tell people I knew John before he was born. Because my parents, you know, were really good friends. Seriously, yeah. My when his dad came over from England, he was my father's roommate, and then, you know, his father introduced us to his new wife, and then, you know, there was Mark, and then right after there was John. You know, so, you know, seriously. And of course, you don't have a relationship like that with everybody that you know. But it's one of those things where it's important. Again, it's not what they used to call curtain talk. You know, at parties, people go by the drapery and they be talking inane things, you know. What I'm curious about is, how does a city like this and the South Coast itself, how is it possible that so much came from this spot on the earth?
I mean, you think about the fact there are so many different cultures here for a starting point. You know, my wife's family is French Canadian, you have Portuguese, Cape Verdean. I'm sure there's you know, like Dominican as well. I'm going to miss a whole bunch. But that's a huge part of it. When you have all different kinds of groups in one area, that tends to make that area really fertile. And then you have the proximity to the Cape, to Boston, to Rhode Island. You know, I mean, I'm someone who migrated here from Boston because, you know, I wanted to actually have a home that my family could fit in. My wife's originally from the area, so that's a huge draw as well. But a lot of people, you know, grow up here, but also a lot have come from other areas and like, yeah, I've had enough of Boston, or I've had enough of Providence, or whatever. I need a place that's, you know, maybe a little bit more manageable and affordable. And I can see, like, I'm more connected to the artistic communities that I'm interested in here than I was in Boston, because I don't have to cover so much territory to be in contact with them. You know, Boston, if I was living in, you know, southern part of Boston, I usually had to cross the river over into Cambridge or Somerville to do stuff, which there is like a 40-minute trip. And here, you know, to get from one end of the city to another is 15 minutes. And then, you know, to get out to outlying cities is not that far. You know, Providence is as far away from, you know, where I live in New Bedford as Somerville was, you know, when I lived up in Roslindale in Boston. And it's like, you know, it's 30 miles to go to Providence. It was only 6 miles to go from Roslindale to Somerville, but it took an hour. So
Exactly.
having everything really tightly packed together, even, you know, and have the whole region be easily traversed, I think is a huge benefit. Like, we'll get people over from Providence and the Cape to do stuff. And you get that kind of cross pollination. I think it just makes the areas really fertile, particularly creatively.
Yeah, I mean, I'm, you know, my wife is from Detroit. She grew up in her neighborhood. There were a lot of the Motown artists who went on to, you know, big fame. And so I was watching Hitsville, and Berry Gordy was explaining how he was a production and line worker for Ford, and it just hit him like, I could produce records the same exact way using the assembly line process. And everybody thought, you're daft, you're crazy. But one of the things that really hit me was like, oh my God, Berry Gordy did not have to leave town to fill his studios. All that talent came from pretty much that same neighborhood. So I'm thinking to myself, in contrast to the South Coast, you know, New Bedford, I keep referring to New Bedford because it's where I was born and brought up. The talent is here. It's just extracting it. It's like minerals in the earth. They're there. They're going to sit there until somebody goes and pulls them out. And that's probably what we need more of.
And I think the good thing, you know, I mean, the pandemic was awful, but it remains awful because it's not over. But, you know, the upside is I feel like coming out of the pandemic, there are more opportunities for musicians to perform and get out there and be known and sell their work and have it be heard than there were pre-pandemic. You know, we had places like Play Arcade open up that started hosting music, various pop-ups around downtown. You know, I'm think Poor Farm continues to do stuff as well as you know, Rose Alley. And then, you know, with grants, you know, I know multiple people who have grants for music on top of what I'm doing. And so, you know, the opportunity is there for people to be heard, and the talent is here to fill those slots and not keep recycling the same people over and over. It's incredible. And you know, when you keep finding out about new people, it's like, oh, I didn't know about that person. It just tells you how compressed the talent is, you know, in the city, in the area, that you can just, you know, not know about some of these people, even though, you know, it's not a huge area.
Let's talk about Hollywood, because you know, in these conversations, you know, when guests are speaking, they always like trigger something off or spark something off, but all of a sudden we're noticed by Hollywood. We've got what, 2 productions going on right now, 3 productions. I mean, we had a Dollhouse that went international, for God's sakes.
Yeah. Flip My Dollhouse, which is an amazing shop. Like, you know, that is a fun shop to visit. And then suddenly they have one of the doll shops in the Gilded Age on HBO.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing because people are finding out more and more about the city. They're finding out, I mean, help for, I think with Flip My Dollhouse, like they're physically the largest dollhouse shop in the country. So when people find that out, they're like, well, I need to go check that out. And likewise, we're still like the most profitable fishing port in the world, or at least in the country rather. And, that brings people here and they start wondering what else is going on in this place that we don't know quite as much about. We've had numerous film productions as well. Fall River has, film productions. I think people are seeing that the area has a lot of character and a lot of interesting stuff going on. And also that, you don't necessarily have to be in a Boston or a New York to be filming really interesting stuff. You don't have to take on that, financial overhead as well. Like it's cheaper to work here because we're not Boston or New York or LA. And that means that you bring a little bit of the local character into these films, like they did with Don't Look Up.
I was in Detroit visiting with my family. It's not my wife's family, it's my family too. And her sister's like, hey, let's check this out. And I'm watching that and I'm saying, that's the Big Mamie. She's like, what are you talking about, Ron? I said, that's the battleship. Are you sure? I'm pretty positive. I've been on there like, and wait a minute, wait. That's the Braga Bridge. There's no other blue bridge that I know of. It's actually kind of cool.
Did you know that Adam Katz from Play is actually he worked on that movie as well. He's in the background as an FBI security guy.
I heard. Yes, Jennifer I heard.
Lawrence.
Yeah.
So he's done stunt work for ages, and he's a fantastic guy. I mean, I love the art.
Well, his family's fantastic. They used to, Katz Motors. I mean, yeah. The other thing is, as you were speaking, the train is finally coming back. The train pretty much stopped rolling just around the time I was born, and every year since, it's coming back.
Yeah.
2 generations
but it
later.
Really is.
Yeah. How do you think that's going to add to the cultural mix? And well, actually, it's going to go both ways, right? It's going to ebb and flow, right? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I mean, my thoughts are, first of all, it makes places like New Bedford even more of a destination, because now you can instead of like worrying about the car, particularly if you're coming from Boston, you may not even be worrying about having a car. For a long time when I lived in Boston, we didn't have a car. We did zip car, but mainly we did the T. If you have the opportunity to take a train down and spend like a long weekend, particularly for things like, the Feast of the Blessed Sacrament or the New Bedford Folk Festival, suddenly there are opportunities for people to come down and just do a weekend here, not worry about the car. Things are, particularly downtown, are incredibly walkable. I think it's going to have a tremendous impact. And we also have a venue in the Vault that will bring bands in that maybe aren't going to Boston, as well as Itarian will do the same thing.
Well, I mean, I remember in the 80s, when Devo, Talking Heads, all those.
Yeah.
What was really interesting about those groups was that they seemed to prefer smaller venues. It was like kind of bizarre to. It was one of the things I noticed, is that they weren't the stadium type performers, with the pyrotechnics and so on and so forth. There's something, I mean, I experienced it with my mom, because I was brought along, with childcare, a single mother. It was difficult. So I went to all these different venues, and there's something so intimate about that kind of performance. When my just freshly minted fiance, my wife Paula, after I proposed to her when she came over to visit in Portugal, we went across the street and they had a father singer, and wow, did that bring back memories, because she wasn't on a stage. She was walking through the tables and singing, and there's just this energy that just you can't get from videos and watching TV and such. How important is that to you as a
in a large space? It's really important to me because the connection you can make with people who are right in the room is really powerful. And you put a screen in front of that, and you don't have that anymore. You have somebody enjoying music as opposed to two human beings connecting on the basis of, this, emotional medium we call music. To be able to make eye contact with someone who's really enjoying what you're doing, for them to actually see you up there, really into it, really trying to communicate, it's a totally different experience. There's no online thing that's going to ever take that place. Online is convenient, it's easy, but you're in a box. Everyone's in their own box. And the excitement of going to something like Pilobolus, for instance, on Sunday, my family went to Pilobolus. Like, I enjoyed watching the videos, but there is nothing like seeing that unfold. The next to last piece they did, where they had a screen, like from the angle I was at, like I could see behind the screen. That was its own level of fascinating. I got a little piece of the performance, and the folks on my side got a piece of the performance that you wouldn't have gotten straight on. And that's like the unique experience of being in that room at the Zeiterion, and just seeing these bodies in action, doing the things they're doing. And you're going, how are they doing that? Because I know, for instance, there was one piece, it was 3 people on a table, and they're carrying each other, and they're bouncing on the edges, and they're swinging. And it's just like, I know that table could not be more than 6 feet in diameter. And I'm not going to get that out of a screen, but I will definitely get that by, even if I'm, 100 feet away, I'm like, those are actual human beings doing that. And there's just a different way that you connect to a performance when you're there in the room. And it's not, lights flashing at you off the screen. It's like, those are human beings up there doing this in real time, and they have got me hooked.
Yeah. Well, many moons ago, I was a set designer, a set painter, set designer for what was then SMU Opera, Southeastern Massachusetts University Opera. This was many years before it evolved over to Dartmouth, the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. And even though it's, I believe that was supposed to originally have been an 1,200 seat house, the same size as the state, what was called the State Theater, the Zeiterion. The state, in its infinite wisdom, the state of Massachusetts, cut it down to, I think, about 800. So the sightlines were a total mess, and it was a brutal place to put on a production. But still, to be able to be in the wings and look out into the audience and see the rapt attention of people, and one of the best private or one of the best moments I ever had. I mean, I'm a set designer. Nobody knows who the heck that guy is, right? And then I think it was second act of Tossi Fan Tutte, the curtains part, and there's no one on stage. I mean, there's not supposed to be anyone on stage. It's a moonlit garden, and they start applauding, and I'm like, hell. And my mentor, Tom, was like, Tom, what the hell are they applauding? We're whispering, what the hell are they applauding? He says, it's your set. It's fucking gorgeous. I was like stunned. I was absolutely stunned, but it's part of the magic, because everybody is part of this thing, really, it is the smell of the grease paint and the roar of the crowd, As you're moving forward in your career, what are your goals? I mean, what's the brass ring or the brass rings that you're trying to grab?
There isn't a big brass ring, honestly. It's just the joy of being able to do what I love to do, like creating music, talking with people about music. I have a sideline doing video editing. I love doing that too. To be able to do all that stuff, make a little bit of money, help my family, but mainly to be, in a creative conversation around all that stuff. Like to be able to write songs, to be able to do things like with NBWaves, I was able to go into Play Arcade and Besties and Moby Dick and record stuff. And, half the fun of that is just talking with people about what they do. Like to be in the brewery, that brewing space at Moby Dick, where the other 2 guys are named Scott too, which is a trip by itself. Like here's 3 Scotts in a room, 3 Scotts walking a bar.
Yeah.
But to be just talking with them about how they got into this, where they worked before, what are they working on now, making those connections is like, it's half the fun of working on a project like that, because it's not just me in a room with a bunch of sounds. It's like I went out, I got those sounds, brought them into the music, but also I actually connected with people as I was doing it and made something that from their sounds, the sounds that they were creating in working will now actually be a part of the music. That's just exciting to no end for me.
Yeah, it is. I remember when my eldest daughter was very young. It was kind of a thrill where, you would be someplace doing something, you know, not paying attention, and then you trip across your own work, so to speak.
Yeah.
And she would say, "Who did that?" And you know, have that moment of like, "Daddy did that." You know, the Moby Dick. My wife and I designed like the first 10 beer labels for that place. That's how I met her.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, when
Oh, wow.
she was I interviewed her for the graphic design position before I left to go live in Portugal. But that's yeah. Well, life is weird. You just never know how it's gonna turn out. But you know, you're talking
It
about your
is.
yeah. Um, um, was it Steve Wright used to say, "It's a small world, but I still wouldn't want to paint it."
Oh, that's one of my favorite sayings.
Yeah. Um, when you were talking about your soundscapes, I was getting visuals in my head as you were talking about these things, and I'm thinking to myself years ago, and I think John Robson was involved in this. I don't know where it came from, if it was a national effort, but it was called 24 Hours, and I think it was a national program where several cities got involved, and a bunch of photographers just scattered. You know, each one had its own time slot. You know, from midnight to whatever, 15 past, and then 12:30, and then quarter up. I don't know if it was 15-minute increments or whatever.
Mhm.
And they just fanned out across the city for 24 hours and took photographs. Now, video wasn't exactly an accessible or an easily producible, you know, for like hobbyists, or, you know, you didn't find that many video professionals either, other than people who worked for stations and everything. But I could only imagine doing that kind of a program again with your soundscapes. Just
Yeah.
the soundscape and stills, and, you know, mixture of stills and videos for 24 hours around the South Coast. We ought
I
to
would
write a
love to do
grant for that.
Yeah. I'm taking notes because
Yeah.
that would be an exciting project. You know, it's to have this, you know, soundscapes that were made from sounds of the city, have photographs from the city, projecting on the side of a building
Hmm.
or whatever you did. Oh, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
ambient and soundscapes are, you know, that's things I've been exploring for a few years. It's funny because with this project, there's an element of that, and yet at the same time, I ended up writing a couple of proper songs too. So it was one of those projects where I didn't know what I was actually going to generate when I started. And I generated soundscapes, and it's like, oh, look, here's a couple of songs while you're at it. It's like, oh, that's nice when that happens, because I didn't go into the project with the goal of writing proper pop songs. Just they happened.
I don't know if mnemonics, yeah, I've mentioned this a couple of times in some of the other episodes, but I don't know if mnemonics is the correct term. I thought mnemonics was back in the old days when Maxwell House coffee was very popular. They used to have the old percolator, you know,
Yep.
with the little glass view thing on the top where the the handle was, and they had that do 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 do, you know, like it was the percolating of the coffee that they turned into this little sound,
It's a little jingle.
a little
Yeah.
jingle, exactly. And I find myself that I'm triggered by certain things. You know, we had this oven that we had bought, that was the last of its kind, because they went all digital after that. So this was still analog, and the timer, you know, the oven timer, when it hit, it was like the first chord from "I Feel Fine" from the Beatles. I was just
Oh yeah.
thinking Don
Yeah.
Wilkinson's Element. He's got that door ajar, you know, the open door, and my brain automatically launches into a song. I don't know why it does that, and I'm wondering if I have a rare condition, you know. But then again, then you're saying you hear these sounds and then you make songs out of them. I'm hear these sounds and they trigger a song that I'm familiar with. So same,
Yeah. Well, the
both
fun
ends of the same wavelength.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and the funny thing with the sounds is sometimes I would turn them into something that sounded like the original sound, and sometimes, you know, they'd be so processed it would turn into a new thing. But there's one piece that'll be on the next EP that it's like it's seagulls down at the waterfront, and when you hear the sound, it's a very musical version of seagulls at the waterfront. Like that sound by itself, like you could turn it into music pretty easily. One of the things I just put out had a, well, actually, the rhythm track was actually my daughters playing air hockey at Play Arcade. Like there
Really?
was like a 2-second snippet of them doing it, And with a
But there
little
was
cutting, it's like,
syncopation going
now we
on.
have a groove.
Yeah.
The groove was there. Like, it's like, why would I not use this groove? And then the other sound is birds at Buttonwood Park. And it sounds like birds, but trying to talk like humans. It's like, sometimes you get the sounds and it's like, I don't really need to do much with that. Like, just throw, little reverb on it and suddenly, play some notes and boom, we've got talking birds, like some kind of, nightmare from the island of Dr. Moreau, but doing catchy stuff,
It's my brother Jim, who's his last duty station was at Bodega Bay, where they shot The Birds, Hitchcock's Birds. So
no kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was their big claim to fame. But we've got a wind chime that I've been really tempted to see if I could get some sort of a sound activated recorder going on, a remote recorder, because I swear sometimes when the wind is blowing certain velocities from certain directions, that there's a cadence. It's not just a ding, 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 ding. There's like, oh my God, that sounds just like,
right.
And you can't capture it again.
There's something about the way the wind is blowing, and at that moment is doing something that it wouldn't do otherwise.
Yeah. And do you know anything about Ennio Morricone, who did The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly? Fistful?
Oh yeah.
I always wondered about where did he get his inspirations, because talk about sound. This guy had to be one of the most sound pure composers ever. And I'm not a musicologist.
I don't know where he got his inspirations, but you can tell like he's pulling stuff from nature. He's pulling stuff, obviously to match the films he's scoring, but he's getting something that's so close. And just, I think with traditional instruments and to be able to do that, to be able to hear, well, that instrument's, I'm going to make that instrument do that. I'm going to, it's like, who does that? But some people have that gift for just like hearing, how am I going to make that sound? With that instrument, or find the instrument that's going to do the thing I want it to do, as opposed to doing just like a traditional score, which would have been fine.
Yeah, but I mean, they made the movies. I mean, a friend of mine in graduate school was a firearms expert and a collector of antique firearms, and he said, "Do you know what else is unique about this guy's movies?" And I said, "No." He said, "The sound of gunfire is authentic. It's not the crap that Hollywood puts out." Because you hear that report that, he said that's an actual sound, not some made up cap gun thing from Hollywood, a flashbang kind of a thing. But now I've got Once Upon a Time in the West going on in my head. I mean, those tracks are just phenomenal.
Well, and bringing in the gunfire means that, you're bringing in a sound that's not stock. People listen to it more. They listen to it differently because they haven't heard it 1,000 times before.
Right. And you've got that single shot and the report hangs in the air and he just hangs on that thing, which is incredibly phenomenal. Let me ask you about now, as one of the first additional hosts to the In Focus podcast on the Artists Index, what are you hoping to achieve for yourself utilizing this community, digital community archive? Because that's a technical slotting term for what we are.
Yeah, good question. I haven't thought about that, but the first thing I think of is that my whole life, starting with growing up with an older brother who's a huge music fan, has been about just having this whole extended conversation about creativity and music. And I feel like what would further things for me is actually talking with people and learning from them, because you can go into a conversation, talk with people who have the same reference points and the same experience, and you won't come out of it any wiser, and you'll probably come out with just whatever biases you have already further ingrained. But to talk with people who have their own perspective, their own approach. I mean, you mentioned Quinn Sullivan. That's someone I would love to talk with, because here's a young guy who's, playing the blues and is a phenomenal guitar player, but also, he's branching out as a songwriter. That's the piece that really interests me, because, not only because songs are interesting, but I love the idea of like, okay, what does he see in songwriting? Like as a young guy who's come up in a more traditional vein and trying to make his own mark, like, where's he coming from? You know, it's going to be a very different place than I come from as a songwriter, and I want to learn from that. And I think that's my takeaway, is like talk to people, get their perspective on how they create, because there's no wrong way to do it. And ideas may open up for, you know, how could I take an approach like that and do something with it? That's where I think I could benefit the most. And just honestly, Ron, I just love talking rubbish with people. That's like one of my pastimes anyway, but to be able to get something out of it, to be able to connect with people.
We need to get a beer sponsor, by the way. We need to get a beer sponsor. We have a spirit sponsor. You know, we have Dan Cooney's Heavenly Spirits Imports, but we need a beer sponsor, and it's because, you know, the libation, you know, whether it's coffee, and we'll have to get a coffee one as well.
Yeah.
Because these are the things that people converse over, is always over some sort of, you know, refreshment, you know,
there's some beverage. Yeah.
Exactly. Johnny Gwynn has been on the show once. He's down in Tennessee trying to make a life down there. Go on to theartistindex.com, click on the In Focus podcasts on the tab. You'll find his episode, listen to it. Quinn Sullivan's also on there. I had those two. But as I tell people many times, this is not a one and done. You know, this is just one page of your life, a chapter of your life, you know, one book and a set of volumes. Bring them on back and speak to them from, you know, musician to musician. You know, that would be great to do. We're going to start to wrap this up. Any final thoughts, any aspirations?
My final thoughts are I'm just excited to get started. You know, music has been such an important part of my life, and conversations around music and creating with people has been just, you know, a huge resource for me in my life. So to be able to, you know, have those conversations, have them in public, and have people share their knowledge is just really exciting for me. And I'm really looking forward to getting going.
Excellent. Now, do you prefer to be called a musician or or a sound artist, or a musician sound artist, or?
Wow. You know,
labels
it's weird because I've only recently come to think of myself as a musician, you know, because I've been kind of hacking at the guitar for 30 years. So it's like, it's relatively recent. I tend to think of myself more as songwriter, but like songwriter / musician, or songwriter / sound sculptor. Sculptor sounds a little pretentious, but it's also kind of what I do. Like, I like to experiment with sound and make new sounds, whether it's, you know, taking the stuff from NBWaves, where, you know, I'm taking field recordings, or doing different stuff with the guitar. So it's called a songwriter sound sculptor.
Okay, so songwriter sound sculptor. It sounds really good. And it makes a lot of sense. Well, folks, we're going to wrap up another episode of the Artist Index In Focus podcast with our guest today, the man with a double agenda, our guest, Scott Bishop, and also our soon-to-be, only because we're just going to wait for him to crank out his first episode, but he's going to be our first of many hosts on here that's going to help us not spread the word, but spread out, as the Three Stooges would say, and try to bring in all this incredible knowledge that's out there. Fisher people.
Casting the net. Casting the net wider.
Exactly. Thanks so much. And with that in mind, and Scott's program is going to be sponsored with a grant from the Massachusetts Cultural Council in cooperation with the New Bedford Local Cultural Council. And that just makes it all the better, because he's going to get paid, and I haven't seen a dime.
Dang, I'll have to buy you a beer, Ron.
You have to buy me a beer, that's for sure. And Moby Dick, yeah. Okay, folks, till next time. See ya. Bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.